Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. We are back with another episode of Daily Palantir, and on today's show, we're going to be discussing two main things because in 5 days, February 5th, we've got Palantir Q4 earnings on this channel. I will be live, and it's going to be an exciting couple hours discussing what the future is for Palantir. Today, we're going to be going through retail shareholder questions that have been asked by retail. Some of these questions are good, some of these questions are not that good, but I want to give my perspective, my thoughts on what questions I would like to get answered and what real things I would like to know that I think honestly all retail and institutional investors would really want to know in order to make sure their investment thesis is intact for Palantir. And then second, last thing I'm just going to play at the end of this episode, I had Dan Ives, who was nice enough to join me on my channel yesterday. He talked about his Palantir Q4 earnings preview, and there's one main thing he cares about, and that is customer count. And from his perspective, given he's been on the ground talking with a lot of these clients that have been going to these boot camps, he thinks boot camps are scaling really well. So at the end of this episode, we'll play that clip, and you guys will get to see his thoughts. Don't go anywhere. Palantir earnings, 5 days. Let's get into it. All right, so let's talk about the core question. So this is on Robinhood. If you go to Robinhood, this is a technology company they acquired called Say Technologies, and you can basically filter through any company that allows retail questions. And there's recommended, top voted, most shares, newest. We're gonna do top voted first and just see what are like the 5 to 6 core top questions that retail is asking in the context of Palantir and things that they are trying to know. So, first one, let's discuss right here. What is the expected growth percentage of 2024? Now, they're going to answer this. This is a very important question. 728 votes, so it makes sense that it's a question that people ask. But obviously, they're going to answer this question. This is just going to come with guidance. So we'll see what they say on that question. But obviously, growth percentage, in my perspective, if it's not at least above 20%, the stock's going to be tough to move higher. If it's at 20%, I think that's at least reasonable. 22% is nice. 25%, I think the stock actually makes a move higher because, the street's like, wait a second, this company's growing again. And right now we're at 17% year-over-year growth. It's going to be, look, dude, that's the number that I get goosebumps on. Like when I see that press release, that's the only number I really want to see. I don't care about revenue. I don't care about EPS. I'd like, at the end of the day, that number is the number. And if we get a good number there, then things are going to go good. If we don't, things might not be the best. Rashab says, what is the short-term and long-term roadmap for Palantir? That's not the best question in my opinion because, management, they've been pretty clear about what their long-term vision is. So I'm surprised I got 525 votes. It's a much more generic question, but maybe some retail investors just want some generic answers about what's going on with Palantir. I, as a retail investor, and I'm sure people that watch this channel, want a little bit more specifics in what we want to know from Palantir. Patrick says, any insight on when we can expect S&P 500 inclusion? This is probably going to happen by mid-2024. Palantir really can't comment on that. I don't think they even know exactly. It's really dependent on the committee and when they decide to allow a company in. Now, if you're available to get a contract, then you will get if you're available to get included in the S&P, you will be included in the S&P as long as you meet all the requirements. And Palantir obviously meets all the requirements. GAAP profitability for 4 consecutive quarters was the big one. So that's done. We have to be above a 12 billion market cap. You have to have a certain volume of your shares. All of that is good to go. It's just a question for the committee to come together. They weren't going to get recommended in December when Uber and Lululemon, much more bigger companies, were on the list. So it will be Palantir's time. Definitely 2024, in my opinion. Probably mid-2024, and we'll see when that happens then. And management has also talked about S&P 500 inclusion, right? So they haven't shied away from this question. I just don't think they would be able to give an exact answer on when it would happen. All right, Srinivasa says, when will Palantir start paying dividends? This is a bad question in my opinion. Palantir is a growth company. The growth rate needs to be justifying the valuation, which it's not right now. So hopefully that guidance on the growth is very good. But Palantir should not pay a dividend in my opinion, because a dividend would mean that they're taking money from their operations, from their cash reserves, and they're giving it to shareholders. And the way they should do that is by getting the stock to go up because they're growing. And so if you buy it at 15 and it goes to 30, maybe 100, right, one day, you will make a lot of money on those shares. You will be able to sell those shares to the market because they will be worth much more than what you paid for them. But if you're getting a dividend of 2 to 3% every quarter, it's not going to be able to grow at the level it needs to grow. Palantir is a company that needs to be reinvesting every single dollar they make back into the business, establishing a moat. You got Ted Barber yesterday on the Palantir daily episode. I talked about who's incredibly ecstatic about boot camps. To the point where he was kind of teasing other SaaS companies about getting the water. It's wet when it comes to these boot camps and like how they're going to market with software. So the dividends are not in the dividend is not going to happen in my opinion, and they shouldn't happen because Palantir should be growing. Carlos G says, what are your key R&D opportunities in the future? How do you expect these innovations to contribute to your core business and open new market opportunities? This to me is basically What new products are you working on? I mean, we saw the mixed reality stuff. We know they had AIP, and that's obviously scaling and doing well. But Palantir is an innovative company. It's a company that's not acquired companies since 2016. You got Snowflake acquiring 4 companies last year, right? Palantir innovates internally. I mean, AIP came out of basically 2 months of work once ChatGPT went mainstream. I mean, they were the first to actually bring something like that to market, and then they had 2 whole conferences on AIP. So, in my opinion, I definitely feel Palantir is working on some new stuff they haven't showed us. I mean, that mixed reality set was like, you know, something we didn't expect. SkyKit last year was something we didn't expect. So they're definitely working on something. I would imagine they are. The question is when they're going to expose that stuff and when is the right time to bring it to market. And so I would definitely like to get a little bit of a preview of just like, hey, what are you working on? What is your mind on? What is the company thinking about in terms of new avenues for revenue? Fed start in June. They didn't make it like the biggest deal, but that was a new product offering that they kind of came out of nowhere. So it'd be really interesting to see what opportunities they're thinking of as well. Benjamin says a stock buyback has already been approved. What factors are under consideration for when or at what price the buyback will be initiated? I don't think they should do a buyback at all. I think the stock is a bit expensive right now given the growth, and I think that eventually the stock will be cheap, but I don't think the stock should be getting bought back right now. Now, if they increase the growth rate to like 25-30%, and the stock goes to $22, $23, and we sustain those levels for 6-7 months, and we've capitulated within a range, where we're not going from 16 to 21, then to 17 to 18, which we've basically been going back. I mean, if you've been trading Palantir over the past, couple of months, you've probably made some money just on the upside or the downside. But we need to be at a certain range. I think buybacks will create a floor to the stock when they're done. And I don't think Palantir is ready to give a floor to their stock yet, because theoretically, their stock could fall back down to 12, 13 bucks with a bad macro and a bad quarter. That could very well happen, right? Now, it would be tough because there would be a lot of people waiting to buy the dip, but it is possible. And I think Palantir is like, well, if that's possible, why would we buy back our stock right now? Like, there's just no point if we could get it back cheaper. Now, granted, if you think the stock is undervalued at 15 or 16, then it makes sense to do the buyback. But the only way it's undervalued is if the growth is there, because then the growth is going to justify that 15 or 16 is cheap, given the stock's fair value should be 20 to 25. I don't think Palantir has clarity on that yet. I personally do not think they've done a buyback. I would be very surprised if they put in some of the money in the past quarter to do buybacks. We'll know by February 5th. But I don't think they've done that. I think they've authorized it to give shareholders the comfort to know that they do have the ability to do that, but they're not going to do it yet. The other reason is we need net interest income. Remember, we have $3 billion in short-term treasuries. That's going to be generating us 40 to 50 million bucks in terms of net income, which will increase to which will help us with GAAP profitability. Income from operations should still be substantial enough to make us profitable, but I want to get to $100 million of profit this quarter. Last quarter, we had 70 million. It would be really nice to have 100 million profit quarter and maybe guide for like, $400 to $600 million of pure net income next year. I mean, that would be amazing. That would help EPS go up. And to do that, as long as the Fed keeps rates high, you need to get some of that juicy net income. And if you can have $3 billion in cash that's allowing you to do that, why wouldn't you? So to me, I don't think the buybacks make sense yet. Phil says, Palantir executives have been offloading stock for years. 69% of Palantir stock is owned by retail investors. Only 10% is held by insiders. Why should we feel good about the future of Palantir? This is a question that they're not going to answer because it's about stock sales, but it's a question I personally wish they would answer as well. Look, at the end of the day, Palantir DPO'd for a reason. They were a company that had 20 years of progress and employees needed liquidity. And the only way to get liquidity is by offloading your shares to other people that are willing to pay for them. So if you bought it at $10 and you paid, $20 billion in terms of market cap for it, roughly $20 billion, someone might have got their shares at $1 or $2 and they made a decent amount of money because they gave up, 10, 15 years of their life to Palantir. Insiders like Peter Thiel sold at $21.85. Karp sold at $21.85. Sham sold at $21.85. Obviously, in my opinion, and you have to be very objective here, we can't be like the Tesla community that's like, 20 million cars in 2 years. Like, no. Like, we got to be a little objective. I'm a Tesla shareholder as well. No digs at them. But Palantir at $21.85 was ridiculously overvalued given the growth. And management knew that. That's why they sold then and not, before. They sold at that price and they sold aggressively at that price for a reason. This question to me, though, it doesn't take into account what's actually going on with Palantir. At the end of the day, this is an AI story. This is a story of a generational company, in my opinion. And this is a company that is having all of its hands in every geopolitical crisis that happens. I don't think you need to have, 80% of insiders holding the stock and things of that nature. It's one of those companies where it's been around for 20 years. People wanted liquidity. They got rid of their liquidity. And you got the two biggest people, Karp and Thiel, that still own collectively, I think it's 5 to 7% of the company. They own a lot of shares. I mean, just Karp alone, I think, owns around 60 million shares. Peter Thiel, somewhere around 40, 50 million. I mean, they own shares, right? So it's not a question of them not owning shares. It's a question of what I think the heart of this question is, why did you guys sell over the past year? And outside of the scheduled sales that they might have had, it's because they wanted to make some money. I mean, like, it's that simple. And when you've been at the company for 20 years and someone else thinks, that hasn't been at the company for 20 years, that didn't build the company, but that wants to invest in the company, if they're willing to pay a certain price and you're willing to take some off the table and give it to that person, that doesn't mean you're bearish about the company, especially when you still own millions of shares. It just means that you're willing to give someone else the opportunity to participate and take some profits for yourself. On top of that, Karp has been very honest about the fact that he eats, sleeps, and breathes Palantir, right? And we understand that. Selling 500,000 shares at 21.85 because it's overvalued right now, to me, is not being against Palantir. It's more so just like, hey, I know my company. My company's overvalued right now. If anything, that's a signal to retail saying, hey, it's a bit overvalued. If I'm selling, then we understand that. There will be a world in which Palantir hits $30 one day and Karp will not sell. And a lot of people will not sell because the inflection point in terms of growth will be massive and there will not be a reason to sell. Same thing with NVIDIA CEO and shareholders. I mean, NVIDIA CEO, I think he's offloaded like a couple $100 million worth of shares in the past couple of months. Same thing with Zuck's, unloaded, I think, like $600 million of shares. Now his stock's at all-time highs at $400. Zuck's was not, doing that a while ago. He did that because he felt it got overvalued. I'm assuming he thinks it's overvalued. And overvalued doesn't mean something negative. Overvalued just means like, look, the stock's run up a lot. I want to take some off the table. I still own a lot of shares. And that's exactly what Karp and a lot of management did as well. So to me, them selling is not a big deal at all. Every company has CEOs that sell and insiders that sell. The question becomes, if the company is not growing, I mean, NVIDIA has 4x, Meta has almost 5x. If the company is not growing and then you're selling, that's a red flag, because then it's like, well, you're just selling and dumping it on people that are buying a company that's not growing. And the biggest criticism I have right now of Palantir is that the growth is not good. That growth changes. Insider sales really don't matter, because as long as the company keeps growing, the stock will keep appreciating and other people will own the shares, even if it's not just insiders. You can't expect them to hold every single share forever, because at the end of the day, this is a company and they do need to take profits, just like you and I might take some profits at $20 and $30 and $40 and give it to someone who's willing to pay $40 when we paid $5 for it, or $6. Okay, let's go to one other one that I liked in the newest question. This is the last one we'll do. Jesse says, how are the EU countries in NATO responding to Karpetto's call for increased spending on software that actually works? I like that he said Karpetto. Shout out to Arnie on that name. This is a big one. Look, I think, and this is my biggest takeaway on Palantir's Q4 earnings call, what I want to hear, the government business. What's going on in the government? Where do you see it catering? Do you actually think there's massive competition in the U.S. government space? Do you feel that government growth is going to slow down? NATO countries saw what happened with Ukraine, saw what happened with Israel. Are they upping their spend? And can you give us a little bit more guidance on what's going on with international government revenue and U.S. government revenue? I'm not that worried about AIP and customer count and all that stuff, because they're going to talk about during the call. Like that's not even a question for me, because that's the thesis of their company right now. They're going to talk about that. They're going to go through the numbers. I think it's going to be very well detailed, all that stuff. I want to know, 43% of your business's revenue is government. What's happening in the government sector? Like, can you give us a little bit more clarity? Are you, and you got to be honest here, even if it's bad news, I want to hear it. Like, are you making progress with getting the Estonias and the Finlands and the Polands of the world to pay you guys money for defense? Are they buying Gotham or not? So this is something I would really want to know. I think NATO, Coach Rep has said this on the channel as well, as a $100 billion market opportunity for Palantir. This is the time where I would imagine these companies are, or these countries are stepping up their defense spending on, contributing to Palantir, or like something like a Palantir. And so I would want to get a little bit more clarity internationally, what's going on in the government scene. And then domestically, is there actually competition with these open source vendors, or are you guys on the right track of doing what you need to do to be able to maintain your edge in the commercial space and in the government space for the US? All right, last thing I'm going to play on this episode of Daily Palantir. Dan Ives was nice enough to come on the channel yesterday. He talked about Palantir, his thoughts, how he thinks about boot camps, what's going on. I think he had some really awesome insights. So check it out. This is Dan Ives. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow on another episode of Daily Palantir. Palantir, we got earnings in 6 days. That's my Super Bowl. I know we got the Chiefs coming up, but that's my big one. What do you think? For me, it's singular to me. If they don't have guidance above about 20 to 25%, stock's going to be in a tough situation, since the valuation is a little tough given the growth hasn't been there. How do you feel they're going to report? Do you think they're going to be exciting? Karp's been going around, been very excited on all these conference calls that he's attending. Any thoughts on Palantir?
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying from a guidance perspective, but I think the most important thing is almost forget like X government. pinpointing what enterprise conversions look like to AIP.
Hmm.
I actually think going in, I'm less focused on guidance. Of course, as long as it's within the bracket.
Right.
But I'm more focused on numbers starting to support what the conversions look like toward AIP.
Do you think, I mean, I know you've worked with their team a little bit. Do you think that boot camp model that they're doing where they go to customers, they show them the product for a couple
It's
of
been a
days?
home run.
Why? Why do you say that?
Because first of all, they're very well aware of like there were certainly perceptions of Palantir.
Right.
So like they owned it. Like they understood like Palantir. I've heard different mixed things. So the boot camp it tears that down and they see the product. Like Palantir, especially in bake-offs, a lot of these larger, bigger deals in the enterprise. But when they start to get embedded within the IT departments and within a lot of companies, like
Right.
there's huge groundswells within Palantir, some more than others. But it's so important that you preach the gospel type thing in these types of, especially when you're trying to basically like push a whole new platform. That's
So for you, it's less about guidance as long as we're in that 20 to 25% range. You want to see the conversion on the boot camps to clients that signed up for AIP. That tells you everything.
so let's compare it to Microsoft. Let's say Microsoft guidance is like there's weaker PC.
Right.
Again, more focused on the cappuccino tomorrow. Let's say gaming, care less. All anyone's focused. It's less it's cloud, Azure, conversions on Copilot. Palantir, same thing. Let's say it was the upper end of guidance because of government deals.
Right.
And then let's say conversion, it was a little more like cautious around like AIP and the RAM. Numbers would go up, stock would go down.
Right.
Because because again, for government, it's a low multiple business. You're not paying for that.
And in the context of what you've seen with the semis and the GPU demand from the NVIDIAs of the world, does that also kind of signal to you that if the GPUs have this much demand, the software is going to have some demand as well?
I mean, use cases, they're front and center.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, I mean, I have so many, in a lot of our checks and what we do, I mean, there's a lot of companies where maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, they'd be like, no way would Palantir be front, and now they are.
Right. Right. All right. Quick little rapid fire for you. Google. Are you excited about them, or you think that they're gonna not?
I think that could be from like a Mag 7, whatever, Mag 6. I think there's huge upside there because of the cloud piece. Digital ads look strong.
You're not afraid that search is dying because of ChatGPT? That's not something.
I think that's because to some extent with them, you have the most AI engineers in the world that are at Alphabet. Google. You start to narrow a little the gap. What's happening on the hyperscale side, and it's huge. I think that's a big upside area.